We are live. We are live. Okay, fantastic. We've given the technical difficulties, I've just completely dispensed with all the new normal theatrics and bits of branding and whatnot. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's just a complete normal Wednesday. Don't worry about the time. Don't worry about any technical difficulties. What are you talking about? This is how we always start these things. So the normal preamble. Hello, Wednesday. Discipline deep dive into games. If you don't know who we are, check us out. Link in the doobly doo. Thanks for joining us today. So today we're going to be doing a talk. The talk is on character art, in particular, character and creature anatomies. I've forgotten the full title now. You actually had really good importance of anatomy in character art. That was it. Yes. And that talk is going to be delivered by my guest here today, Stuart Deville. How are you doing, Stuart?
I'm very good. That after the technical heart attacks, we're all good.
Brilliant stuff. And hello to everyone in chat. Thanks for being really patient. I love to see you all chatting with each other while we just patiently replay, and start doing Google searches on how to solve our technical problems. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, I've pretty much said what the talk's about. I think we're all thrown a little bit off the normal script, but I think we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. So, Stu, do you want to reshare your slides?
Yeah, let me click the buttons.
Yeah. Now that we're back, um, if anything else goes wrong, folks, what we can do is we can consider using the Intergames Discord as a backup stage if we go down again. But I will comment in the YouTube chat, and Mivi will help me out with the LinkedIn as well if you're watching on LinkedIn. So, yeah, I think let's just go. I think let's just get into it. So there's your slides. Stuart, they're all yours. Have fun, and everyone, please give a warm digital round of applause to Stuart as we talk about character art and anatomy.
Hey guys, nice to see you. Technically, not see you. Good to have you all here. Yeah, as Jonas said, I am Stuart Deville, and as you can see from my slide, I do way too many things in game development. I have been in the industry for around about 10 years, and I have tried to do absolutely everything that there is in game development, and most of it I still do. The only thing I haven't managed to get any kind of decent grasp on is programming. So don't ask me any programming questions. I could help you on like a top level kind of conceptually, but yeah, if you want to help on what code should say or how it should say it or all of that stuff, I'm not your guy. However, I am lead games artist. So I freelance as a lead game artist. I do the entire 2D, 3D pipeline, from 2D flat images right through to modeling, rigging, UVM wrapping, texturing, the whole gambit, and then getting those assets ready to go into a game engine. I'm creative director of my own studio. I run my studio with my two co-founders, Roxanne and Jean-Luca, over at Fribbly Games. I'm also founder and director of Game Dev Local, used to be Game Dev London, um, and I'm a game design lecturer for Carshalton College. And I talk way too much about game development on LinkedIn. If you'd like to join me, now is the time to use that QR code. I might be able to bring it back at the end, but if you've got some way of capturing that, now is probably a good time to do that. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I will move on to our first slide and start talking your ears off. So anatomy is important for character art for so many reasons. But generally, if you can get some anatomy books, I've got some on the shelves over there. I should have had that handy. Then yeah, the understanding of the underworkings of your fleshy selves, and of creatures and animals in general, really helps you in your understanding of the shapes and forms that you need to think about in order to create good character and or creature art. Skeletal structures obviously are even deeper than that. So underneath your muscle anatomy, you have the skeletal structures, and understanding how the skeleton works and how you pad around that skeleton in order to make believable shapes and structures also helps you to deliver really powerful character and creature art. And it all ties in to help make it more believable. Obviously, the skeleton is the framework, and when you come to doing your sketch work for your characters, so that very early stage, normally we do start off with some form of a stick being, depending on what you're trying to figure out, but it's a really good place to start and understand, and again, to make your creations that much more believable. I have whenever you start getting into this stuff, you will inevitably end up with like this weird ability to look at people that you know very well, and you'll suddenly be able to like imagine the structures that are underneath the people. It's a very weird feeling being an artist and understanding all of this stuff. But again, it really helps support making believable and awesome characters. So the major bone structures that you have are that you are probably quite familiar with is human bones, your skull, your spine, your rib cage, and all of these things. The as it says, the primary support for your human body, the thing that helps you walk around, is it's the base structure, and understanding how each of those things affect each other means that you have a better understanding of movement. And so when you come to a stage of how you want to make your characters or creatures move, having an understanding of how those connections work, especially when you get into like rigging. Rigging can be an absolute nightmare if you don't understand how things move, and understanding anatomy and really helps you create, again, believable movement when you're creating your armature structures for your characters. Proportions are, again, also really important for making believable and really. I know when we're working in fantasy, like the word realistic feels a bit weird, but even when it comes to creating fantasy beings, there has to be a level of believability. Otherwise, you end up with some weird monstrosity that just is jarring to whoever's like, let's say it's the player. Yeah, so it can be really jarring for someone if it doesn't. It feels like you have too many questions as to like, well, how does that work though? Because that's not how things work. And proportions are a strong part of that, because proportionally, well, humans and creatures all have like a set of unseen rules, and it's something that as a viewer you instinctively understand. And so getting the right proportions, again, really enhances the believability of the characters that you're trying to create. As part of that, there's a weird thing that you may or may not have heard of called the 8 heads rule. And that's not 8 separate individual heads of one being. That is that if you measured roughly the size of your head, you tend to find that if you were to duplicate your head 8 and 8 sections downwards, as you can see on the little man model here, he is 8 heads tall. And that just seems to be, what would you say? Yeah, it just seems to be how things naturally are. Um, these proportions seem to be set into genetic stone, as it were. Understanding again these underlying structures helps you make a real make everything more realistic, and helps you understand how to make characters more expressive. Understanding the limitations of how far like a jaw can or cannot move, or how like how how far eyebrows can move. Um, and the other thing about that is understanding these rules means that you get to know when to break them. If you're making a character that is more cartoony, then you can allow a jaw to drop to the floor. But if you're aiming for something that's like a bit more realistic, then having an extensively wide opening jaw can be, again, jarring. But if you're doing like some fantastical creature who, let's say, the head structure is more akin to that of a snake, then you have a reason for that jaw to drop open wide. And again, like understanding how those mechanisms work um, is is how you can make a creature that is believable, and people aren't and you're not doing this like people aren't guessing as to whether or not it's supposed to be cartoony or not. They know that it moves to that certain extent because of the underlying workings of the theory of that being. Um, all of this comes into the functionality of your character, so that it not only embodies, like I said, believable movement, but understanding these mechanics enables us to create characters that also look really cool and deliver narrative. So again, like if you had a super fantastical creature like that has this snake-like jaw, there's likely to be some kind of reason why that being is snake-like. And so the more believable that is, the better that delivers the narrative story. Like why are there these types of weird and wonderful beings in this game world? So yeah, adapting real life anatomy into your fantastical creatures. This is a really good example of taking like a standard-ish kind of creature, and then imagining like what if it had these little things here and those little things there. Like what if it had horns? Where would those horns sit? If it has extra feathers or like scales or fur, like where does that sit and why would it sit there? And we take all of this from looking at real world examples. And again, taking from real world examples means that it's more believable. And so you're delivering a character that not only is fantastical, but that someone can just look at and think, yeah, why wouldn't that exist? Incorporating real world anatomy needs to be done right. This is a very good example. It's more of a fun example, really, of how doing it not quite right does stand out. Like you can look at this picture, and yes, it is funny, but that's you just it's not believable. You just know that like a squirrel wouldn't hold a sword like that, and so yeah, you have to be very careful about how you take all of these things into account, so that it can enhance the believability, and be careful where you draw your inspiration from, and try and stick to real biological principles um, to ensure plausibility. A lot of the things that we do when we're doing character, well, especially creature creation, is identifying structures that are similar across different beings. So if you want to, this is like a really good example, if you wanted a human to have wings, for example, or if you want wings to move uh, the way that a hand moves. All of this underlying skeletal structure allows you to understand how those things might move and how they might work and where you could put them. Um, if you were to stack a whole bunch of wings on the back of a creature, like how are they working alongside each other? How would they move together correctly? Um, and if it's a case of um, what I really like in this image actually is that whale's arm, because whenever I've seen images of whales that are flying in the sky, they always tend to just be like super fantastical, and they're flying with their like everyday watery flippers. Whereas realistically, the structure is in there that they could have um, taken those fins and made them more fantastical, and they could be more wing-like. This is something that's totally achievable based on identifying um, yeah, the structures that lie underneath that replicate across different species. And so, yeah, this is where we get into fantasy versus realism. Yes, it's really good if you like understanding actual animal anatomy for making actual animals. Like if you want to make a lion, understanding that bone structure and the anatomy underneath is very important. But also, if you want to make these super fantastical beings, there is a balance to be had. This is like a really solid example of someone taking these concepts and just playing around and coming up with like a whole set of different creatures um, based on how all of these internal structures work. I felt like I felt like this was a bit of a whistle stop tour. I went through um, all of those slides a fair bit quicker than I would normally. Um, so it's probably a good time to move on to audience questions. I think you'll get more out of it this way too.
Nice. No. I think that's fantastic. And given that we've got so many people in the audience, I think that there is largely going to be a lot of topics that we can touch on from discussion alone. And I'm sure we can expand. And if you want as well, we could do some screen sharing. I'm sure we could find some like really great examples out there if we want to like dig into a specific thing that really
Yeah.
reinforces a certain point. So what I'm going to do is let's give us the big faces. There we go, big faces mode. And first off, yeah, thank you very much for delivering all that. I think the squirrel image is just like really touched a point with everyone. Everyone
I
really
like to
relates.
throw something like that into my presentations, no matter what I'm doing, because yeah, it's all well and good being like this is the proper way of doing, this is how we do everything properly. But there's also like really great examples of people who don't do it properly, and in some cases just for fun. I
Yeah.
don't think that person really is trying to get us to believe that those squirrels were battling. Or maybe they were.
I for one was emotionally attached to the drama going on there, but maybe
Yeah.
that's just me. Questions are pouring in, so I'm rather than padding out the time with a question of my own that we can dance around, I think let's just pull straight from the audience, especially given the time delay. So, what I'm going to do is, if you've got a question, I'm going to bring it up on the screen. I will read it out to Stuart. I'll do my best to ask like most of the questions in chat. However, if I think a certain topic is repeated over and over again, or if I think the question's kind of already been answered by something we've already said earlier, then I may just skip over. But one thing to keep in mind is if your question is not answered, or if you feel like there's still something you'd like to learn on this subject, jump into the Intergames Discord. There's a link to a little link tree or something down in the YouTube description, or if you're on our LinkedIn page, I'm sure you can find a link somewhere in our recent posts. What that Discord server will let you do is it will let you join a community of over 9,000 game developers. I was going to say throughout the UK, but it's a pretty international crowd in there these days. A lot of those people are working in the games industry professionally right now, like Stuart is, or are people like yourselves, perhaps being students or being self-taught or wanting to kind of develop a skill whilst in amongst everything else. So jumping into that community is just a great way to be like, yep, I didn't actually find out the answer to my question in this time limited event, but the Discord server is, it's evergreen. It's always on. There's always people there willing to answer questions. There's plenty to learn, and you may get perspectives that you wouldn't get from today as well. So it's worth doing no matter what. Anyways, now that I'm done blowing the Discord horn, let's go. So I'm going to ask the question to you from, I might say this a little bit wrong, sorry, Kokose. First question is, when would you say it's worth sacrificing realism for artistic vision and simply making things look pleasing to the eye? How would you go about modeling/designing something like this?
That's a really good question because my preference is aesthetics over realism. Um, I think you tend to, the more you do it, you tend to get like an instinctual feeling for it. Um, a good example is in the last slide that I shared, the audience question slide. Um, there's this like humanoid hog-like character, and he's a part of a set of other characters who are all bosses, and all of those boss models have we decided early on that the hands and feet were going to be animal based. So under that boxing glove is actually a hoof, but I couldn't get the hoof to look quite right. And the boxing gloves seemed wild, but also matched the character, but also hid this thing that I decided wasn't like pretty enough to like, and not pretty like it needs to look good. Like it just didn't look quite right. And on all the other characters that we have, like their respective hooves, or one of the bosses is a giant gorilla, and so like the hand works really well because they have a hand. But this, like, I just couldn't. Yeah, I had to instinctively go with what I thought A was going to look good, and B that I could get away with,
Hmm.
because I could have put him in any kind of glove, and um, boxing glove. I mean, if the game is Boolean, and everything in that game is kind of wacky and off key. So yeah, you kind of end up with like a sense for knowing what is it that again like delivers narratively and fits, but also looks right.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much for expanding, and I'm glad we got good use of that example there as well, because we moved on
Yeah.
from that slide pretty quickly. Um, Next question. I'm just reading through. There we go. Hero Art 110. When it comes to stylization, how far can this bridge? How far can this bridge? I understand. Yeah. How far can the sort of the bridge of cartoony versus realistic go without going into an uncanny valley? So I guess for you, where's the line between like this is stylistic, but now it doesn't look quite right, or or going
Mm.
into realism and just creating that feeling of like, oh, I don't love it.
It really depends on um, where your character is going. Like, if like a good example is if your character is going into a horror game, then Uncanny Valley is absolutely available to you. Um, if you're making a game that's more about something weird that goes down in a hospital, so you've got like a real world environment, um, and yes, something like maybe it's zombie-ish, like maybe something janky is there, but there's still going to be a line and normally an agreement within the studio as to like where is that line in the sand between how weird or unnerving we want this to look and how real we want to go. Um, you will find whenever you're following a brief that that line is fairly easy to obtain. Um, when you're doing personal projects, it becomes a lot harder because no one's telling you like how weird or not it should or shouldn't look. So if you're doing like work for your portfolio, then you have to decide whether or not you want stuff that's uncanny looking, or whether you want something that is more realistic. Um, the one thing I would say about that is when it's portfolio work, you want to consider like, are you going to be able to explain that away effectively if someone questions you on it? So if you're like applying for a job and they're looking through your portfolio and they go, so this kind of looks a bit like off key. is that what you were going for? You're going to have to be able to explain it. So as long as you know that that's the choice you made and why you made it, then you're fine.
Nice, thank you very much. Next question comes from Knights Concepts. Um, how do you break down what animal features you might want to use in a design when starting with a brief? How do you know that you want hooves on your boxer?
Yeah, so that's conversational. That's you talk to whoever gave you the brief. If you're a lead on the team, then you kind of get to make a bit of that decision, but there's always a conversation to be had. And you tend to, yeah, you kind of have an agreement of like a set of rules. Um, like there's, I was able to put a boxing glove on a humanoid hog because he's humanoid, and it doesn't look too out of place that he would be wearing boxing gloves because he's walking around on two legs. If he was on all fours, it would kind of look a bit weird. Um, so you have the, yeah, unless you put them on all fours, and then but it's always like an ongoing discussion. Um, it depends as well. Like I think, especially when you're working for an indie studio, being a character artist in an indie studio, you get to be a lot more flexible with that. You get to have a lot more input, and so your ideas come in a lot more. Um, and so it's kind of an easier playground for you when you're in that kind of a space.
I just a jumping off point from that question as well, which is like, are there for you, Stuart, sort of really, really digging into your personal viewpoint or like your opinions, are there certain designs that you're like, look, I see that all the time, I'm done with it, I never want to do that? Or are there certain designs where you're like, I love that, I want that in every game? Like when it comes to creature, kind of
Mm.
anatomy and things like that,
I
anything that excites you?
definitely, I definitely don't have anything where I'm like that needs to be in every game.
Hmm.
I feel like, well, that's actually now that I've said it out loud, because I guess to some extent, I freelance for a lot of indie studios, and so I like to think that my signature is kind of in there somewhere, and it probably does come through with like, oh, that's how Stuart stylizes stuff, and so you might, if you are a follower of my work, for example, then you might go, oh yeah, that's clearly one that Stuart made, even when like I'm one of a team of um, like character artists on. Um, I like to feel like there is, and I'm pretty sure that there is a distinct difference between the characters that I make and the characters that my teammates make, even though we're all following the same brief and it all has to look like it sits together. Um,
I mean, obviously, all of your characters boxing gloves, but never on four legs. Famously, famously,
yeah, that's what they'll say when I pass. Like, well, he was the boxing glove guy.
he was like, famous for it. Nice. All right, I'll go back to some audience questions, but thank you for expanding on that. Katie P wants to know what makes a good reference versus a bad
Mm.
reference for anatomy, pose, or proportion.
If you can get hold of them, the old school. How close is it? It's up on my shelf somewhere. The old school books. It's close enough. 1 second.
Yeah, yeah, go for it, go for it. We'll get some reading material, and I'll get some links ready so that everyone can actually look at the book on some kind of website.
So literally, where's my camera? It's trying to blur it
I
out.
love I
Don't
love that
blur it
your
out.
your blur's kicking in. What's it called? I can see it's called Anatomy.
There you go. I've got it on an angle.
Is it Grey's Anatomy?
It is called Grey's Anatomy. It says it's a complete guide to the human body for arts and students. So literally, like, go to a library because these old school books give you like really solid references. And in some cases, like the choices that they make for how to pose the character in order to show you the inner workings of that character end up giving you like really unique poses that you won't find when you just go on and look for character poses. Um, like if you do a Google search for character poses, um, Google tends to give you a certain selection of things. Um, the other problem with Google is that once you've looked at a certain type of image and you again search, hoping for different images, it goes, oh, but you liked this, and so it will show you more of that. So you can end up in this little space of like your poses looking very similar or the same, or at least being given the same or similar references. So old school, go find books. I've got like a whole bunch of books. I've even got I've got like a Disney sketchbook. I've got an animator's survival kit book. Just a whole stack of books. What for whenever I want to do that. Normally, at this stage, I've been doing it long enough that I kind of know. But sometimes I'm like, oh, what was that? Like, how did it look? And then I can just go grab the book. So, um, if you can afford it, go grab books. If you can't afford it, just go sit in the library for an evening. Um, get your phone out, take the pictures.
Nice. And what we can do as well, Stu, if you're up for it, we can grab a little like, a little 3 books or 5 book
Hmm.
kind of reading list from you, and I can send that out to everyone who's signed up on the
Yeah, for
Luma.
sure.
We can post it in the Discord because I'm sure people do appreciate that kind of stuff. The tried and tested books and references. Thanks very much. And I think that feeds quite nicely into someone asking about your design process as well. Actually these references, these books, these kind of physical materials as well. And I'm sure we can expand on that later with other books. In fact, the next question is what anatomy books and academic sources would you recommend? So again, we will revisit that by providing some links and
Yeah.
sources straight afterwards. I think this was an interesting one. So, the existential YouTube name Ever Wonder Why We Are Here has asked, how do you find the heads slash proportions of creatures? And I guess, to feed into this, right, it's like, okay, so we've got a book on human anatomy, and we can
Hmm.
we can we can find out human anatomy by just kind of tapping ourselves, really. But when it comes to slightly more esoteric things like animals, creatures, things that we might not have access to, what are your resources for
Mm.
making sure that that is available and real and sort of
Yeah,
anatomically correct?
I'm definitely in an edge case situation here because I've been doing it long enough that just I eyeball it way more often than not. So I don't I very rarely check direct proportions. The steampunk spider that I created, um, I had 2 images of a spider, and they were both different types of spider. One had like super long legs, because I wanted to kind of understand, making Janice uncomfortable. I wanted to understand, yeah, how it might work if it were like I was basically trying to decide whether I wanted it to have like these super long legs or just to have like a more robotic-y, like the limitations of the creators of the steampunk machine. So, um, there is stuff like the golden ratio works quite well for most things, and then there are if when it comes to proportions, actually, a Google search works quite well because there's not too many different ways for it to be different. Um, the set proportions of a thing tend to be, or at least the agreed set proportions of a thing tend to be an agreed set proportion of a thing. When it comes to like dragons, Um, take your pick. Like, do you want it to have a giraffe neck? Do you want it to have a short neck? Do you want it to be more like an axolotl? Do you want it to be like, yeah. So, but again, that all comes down to um, when you look at it, you you inherently kind of have a feeling of like, mm, something isn't quite sitting right. Um, and hopefully you can flesh it all out in those early stages. I still find that when I get to the modeling stage or even the rigging stage where I've started to make the character move, I'm like, ah, it actually needs more space there. Like that, that's it. Like it's not going to move the way I want it to move unless I go in and change that. Um, which is why I love doing character creation because it's such it's an organic process throughout. There's always stuff that you're going to be like, I'm going to change that actually because this would be cool.
Just a little tweak here and there. I might
Yeah.
just. I think I always love saying this, but everything's an iterative process, especially in art, where it's like the first thing you do is not the final thing. You should do it and then see what needs changing and go back and tweak it and make those changes, and
If you
find
look
what
at
works for you.
Pokemon, like they just go off script. They know the rules and they just go, well, let's break all of those, shall we?
Yeah, and Pokemon, it's doing all right for itself actually.
Hmm, that's
I
okay.
think it's got a bit of an indie following or something. Yeah, let's see how they're doing in a couple of years' time. Hopefully, they'll find some success. Right, I'm gonna jump ahead to a couple of other questions here. So, I think there's a really good one here from Aero Astro Arts, who asks, what are the most common rule of anatomy that you see being broken in beginner art portfolios? And I suppose you can expand this out however you like, which is that what are some of the common mistakes generally, or things that could be and should be improved at that stage in someone's career?
The only thing really that I see, like I've done quite a few portfolio reviews, and I did some for Into Games actually, and uh, honestly, that the one mistake that is common across all of them that make this mistake is that they didn't do it. They didn't check anatomy references. You can see that like um, they've they've tried to draw from their imagination too soon. And the thing is, once you start drawing stuff, it's really easy to do that because you have a certain ability, whatever ability you have to draw. You like even if you were just drawing stick people, you can already draw whatever the hell you like. You can draw you can draw a Slender Man stick man. Like you can whatever whatever you want, whatever you can think of. But the problem is when you're doing this in your head, when you're just looking up into your brain all the time, you're not actually looking at anything, and so it's hard to transfer that to the paper. If you've looked at references, if you've what I did when I was really young, um, and this is something that I learned that is really important, but I kind of did it by accident. Is I used to my friends used to like going out drinking a lot, and I was never really huge on at that time. I was never really huge on drinking, but I liked hanging out with my friends. And so I took a sketch pad with me and I was always drawing the people around me. And then they always drawing them as like weird and wonderful things, turning them into fairies or like putting them on unicycles or whatever the thing was. Um, and so I ended up with like getting a really instinctive ability of looking at someone and being able to break down those shapes. Um, and so you can see in someone's portfolio whether they've taken the time to look at a lot of references because it becomes muscle memory. Like you can whatever you can think of, you actually have a reference for, and your hand knows those shapes, and so it just becomes like something that you can do um, intrinsically.
Nice. I think, yeah, no, that's a very good answer.
That's what I love
Uh,
about being an artist. You can do whatever you want.
yeah, you do whatever you want, whenever you like, and then I guess the hard part is taking that into a professional, sort of the
Mm,
career section, professional bit, which I think kind of links quite nicely to this next question, because Stuart, you are quite multidisciplinary.
mhm.
You have done a lot of different things in this industry, and not just sort of, you're not just a character artist. It says is right under your name as well. CEO, director, founder, but you're also, as you said, you've pretty much done everything that you can do in a game. Just don't come to you with main coding. So the question
Yeah.
here is like, what is your approach to getting, to upskilling, right? But like, you don't live in one corner, therefore you're not spending every single day just harnessing one skill and getting better at one skill, better at one skill. So how are you sort of approaching the idea that you are getting better as a character artist, but you're also improving in so many different other fields as well? Like, you have to be to keep up with this industry.
Mm.
What's that process like for you? What are you doing to kind of maintain that?
Um, yeah, being it's a double-edged sword because being a generalist means that you are incredibly valuable, um, but in a lot of cases, it cuts you off from doing a lot of the specialist roles. If someone wants a specialist in rigging, they're not necessarily going to ask me to do that, and I'm not necessarily going to enjoy it. Um, but I think when it comes to upskilling, like I've been a freelance creative for 20 plus years. I When I left college, I left an art college, and I like instantly decided that I wanted to um, go and do my own thing. I went to a friend of mine. I got myself a market stall, and I used to paint canvases on a market stall and have those canvases up behind me and sell those canvases. And then through doing that, I just kind of naturally built up like a strength of my creative ability in that area. And then I was also like dabbling with graffiti at the time, and someone came to me and said, "I really love the artwork that you've got here. Could you come and do a mural?" And they wanted me to do a mural on the side of a cafe. And so I took what I had learned from that, and it crossed over from I used graffiti paint to do that mural because hand painting would have taken a long time. um, and in the early days of an art career, you don't get a ton of money, so your resource is time. Um, and then from that, I ended up in the local newspaper, and someone saw that and they were like, "That's amazing. I'm doing a book. Would you illustrate it?" And so I took my skill. So I've every every step that I've done normally has come off of the back of what I was doing already. Um, and so over the years, I kind of when I came into game development around about 10 years ago, it just felt really natural and easy for me to take like my ability to, I guess, hyper focus on like creative, on anything that's creative, that I just I obsess over it for um, so more so in the early stages than the later stages. But I tend to find that it's like a working creative muscle. And so when I want to upskill into something else, I I have to really want to upskill on that thing. This is kind of outing me as like someone who's ADHD, but but I have to really want to do that thing in order to become obsessed with it, in order to yeah, spend more time than anyone else would spend like learning a thing and doing a thing. It for some reason just hasn't translated to programming every time. But I guess again, that's I don't really want to do. It fascinates me. I love it. I love that what it does. But um, yeah, there's something about being creative with your hands and taking something from your imagination um, or from someone else's imagination. And again, that came to me pretty early on, hanging out with my friends. I would always ask them to challenge me and say, like, give me something wild to draw. Um, One thing that I seem to always remember is that someone asked me to draw a giraffe riding a unicycle, and I did that, and everyone was quite impressed with it. I was impressed with it because I didn't know I could do it. um,
Where is
yeah,
that
so
picture? Where is that picture now, Stuart?
I,
Like
I
how?
gave it to someone who was like a dear friend of mine, and as I did at the time, and always really, I give away my art just, especially if someone asked me to do it, I go, well, that's yours now. That's what you wanted. This was your weird idea. Congratulations.
That's not profit driven at all. That's just nice. That's
Yeah,
just
I
really
know.
nice.
Imagine.
Um, yeah, that's really wonderful. And it sounds like what as you were sort of talking about that story about how you sort of got started, what I noticed there was part of your upskilling journey basically involves you having a single skill in kind of one area and being asked to kind of flex that skill into a different context.
Yeah,
So basically kind of yeah, I was trying to RPGify this, right? Where it's like you've got your 8 levels in Rogue, but now someone just wants you to dip into Fighter, and well, you
yeah.
already know how to do damage, so you just dip into that, and then now that you've got a bit of XP in that, you dip into the next class, and you dip into the next class, and you just, you're sort of just dipping a little bit into all these different pots, but you're not doing it from zero. You're never coming at a whole
I
new
would say, yeah,
discipline.
like, interestingly, that is exactly it. When I went from like I know how to move a paintbrush or a pencil across a page to get a certain shape, but when it comes to a graffiti can, it's not this. It's the same thing, but it's like you're using your arm as a hand. So like I remember that kind of stuff going through my head as I was doing it. I was like, I want to create, like, I want to replicate this arc, but I can't do that with the can. Otherwise, I get this weird, and it fans out wrong. So I have to actually use my arm as the turning point, which is also how you draw a good circle. You draw it from the shoulder and the elbow, not the hand. But yeah, all of that stuff, it translated across. And so yeah, upskilling. The only place where it completely differs is the business development side of things. Like being entrepreneurial um, is a entirely different skill set. But luckily, I am still obsessed with it. So
Nice. Good to know. I think yeah, it's just bringing it back to that question about upskilling, and it just sounds like yeah, a lot of it comes from being asked to kind of take what you know and just change the context and change the context and
yeah, I
change
would
the
say
context.
if you're not being asked to like in the ways that are giving you these little stretches, then try and find ways that you can take the 3D, 2D to 3D modeling process. I actually started with modeling first, which is actually how you should do it. And then I became obsessed with like UV unwrapping before I became obsessed with texturing, which worked out really well for me because if you understand how to texture before you understand how to UV uh, unwrap, then you can end up in weird places.
Nice. Thank you very much for expanding on that. I think yeah, there's some great advice in there, and I'm sure plenty to go from. And thank you, Miffy, for the question. I haven't thanked everyone for their questions. Thank you, everyone, for your questions thus far. I love this question. Rico Kawa wants to know. So, if you were creating a creature with no internal build, like it's just a blob, what's the process there? How do you do the anatomy of the flesh mass from Carrion or the gelatinous cube that I keep fighting in D&D?
Grab an egg, crack it open, and look at how that blob moves. Um, grab Play-Doh. There's always some reference, even if it's a little bit out of the box, and hopefully you'll be forgiven for making an eggy mess on a counter. But there's always you're looking around. What have I got here that I can crack open?
What's my blobby reference?
There's my my kids who are 3 and 6, they like that gooey, like the goo that comes in that just will. There you go. That's a good example. Um, like what even is Kirby? Kirby does some pretty weird stuff. Um, yeah, there's always some form of reference, even if it's not because a blob creature isn't a thing in the real world unless you count blobfish. But even that, like, that's a reference, right? Um, I
Sorry, I'm
like the
derailing.
no, I like it because, especially because like Kirby is a really good example. Um, the way that he has no, I don't even understand his structure, but it does make sense because he's that cartoony. He can suck in a whole world of weird stuff in order to create mad weapons and ways of moving. Um, like where does that air go? It doesn't seem to go into a stomach. Like you just it doesn't always need to make sense. But there's a sense of which when you're creating a story with these things, um, because these things are never there's always a context that these things live in. So if you've got like this blob that's in a dungeon that eats human people, like you're already in a fantastic world of weird and wonderful things, and adding in something weird and wonderful like that is fairly easy to do. Um, and especially now, like there's so many games and movies and things with stuff like this in that if you're in that genre, then the context does all the heavy lifting for you, and you get to be super creative, and you get to decide how this being works internally. Um, and in some cases, you'll get to like deliver that in a brief to a client who has asked for something weird, and you go, "Here's the weirdness. Here's why it's weird,"
Hmm.
and hopefully they love it.
Nice. Thank you for expanding, and thank you, Kirby, for your assistance in this matter. Um, we've just hit 2 o'clock now. Obviously, we were a little bit delayed by tech issues. But one thing I just want to do, Stuart, is check in with you. How are you doing? Do you think we've got time for two more questions?
Yeah, we've easily got time for 2 more questions. Yeah, for sure.
Great. I'll take at least 2 more questions. I can see one that I think is really good, and I'll scan the chat just to see what the latest questions are. Again, if you have questions and they've not been answered, please do consider joining the Intergames community. Massive community, hungry for knowledge, but people also really giving and really generous there with their time and things that they know. So do consider. I'm going to jump over to this question here. Seprotypes, I hope I pronounced that correctly. What sort of design points would you prioritize for simple designs? For example, if your game has to be simple and you need to sacrifice a lot of detail, how would you decide what needs to be kept versus what needs to be cut?
So I do that quite a lot actually, because especially in indie games, you kind of need to optimize, and you have to, as we say in the art world, kill your darlings. And so I normally aim for what can deliver the story enough, like how, what level of detail do I need to convey a story? And surprisingly, it's very little. You don't need a ton to deliver something that can move people in some way, shape, or form. I've watched so many like stick animations, like literal stick people animations, where like I've giggled because something funny happened. Or I actually saw one not that long ago, and it was someone who had storyboarded this thing about someone whose dog dies. I mean, we all know when someone's dog dies, that's heart wrenching anyway. Um, but it was just like the a stick person, a stick dog, like the background was like a couple of squiggles here and there, just to convey like a short story in a cutscene. Um, and I still felt myself go, oh no, not the dog. So you'd be surprised, like you really don't need that, but the key to it is like how it moves um and how it looks. Um, and you know, even Minecraft, with all of its blockiness, no one complains about the blockiness. If they do that, then it's not for them. But yeah, you'll be surprised. You don't really need a lot. But again, it's a process, and if it's a design brief from a client, then you talk through it. If it's you doing your own within your own studio, then you come together and you have those discussions, and you prototype and you play test. Like you test and you test and you test.
Nice. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Seprotypes, for your question. I'm going to go for one last question now, which is from Elf Champ, champion of the elves. Elf Champ, design wise, do you find it difficult to be able to know when to indulge in what you prefer personally versus what works best for the project, especially as a lead? And I think there's something in there about like, yeah, the vision, the draft, and your personal and professional experience, which, sometimes might conflict on a project. What's that like for you, especially in the context of character design?
It's very difficult. um, I think it's a lot easier for me now than it has ever been before. Like, once you get into like I've done a whole lot of user experience research. I recently just got my qualification in UX research, and that has helped me. Thank you. That has helped me a lot, because you have to take yourself out of the equation way more, like way more. It has, especially if you're making a game and you want that game to be received by an audience, um, and potentially make money. But realistically, just from a base of like the audience that you're making it for, it has to be right for them. And so you can have as many wonderful ideas about how you would have it look and how you would want it to be. But if it isn't in service of the audience that you're attempting to target, if it isn't going to make sense to them, if it isn't going to move them, or yeah, if it's not going to appeal to their tastes and sensibilities, then you're just going to have to be like, well, my idea isn't going to work there, or how I would like it to be isn't going to work there. Um, this will come up a lot as well if you're trying to get into freelancing. Every, I mean, in the indie space, we're all fairly warm and welcome and flexible. Like the collaborative creative process is alive and well within indie games, but still your target is an audience. And so whatever the brief says, like if if you're tailoring like we are at my studio, tailoring a game towards a specific audience who um, expects fantasy and witches to look and behave a certain way, then you can't be too far from that. Like I can't just start breaking crazy rules and being like, it would be really cool if this was a thing, because the audience are going to go, that's weird. Why did they do that? Um, and the key reason why you don't want to do that is because you don't want to break that immersion. Like you want people to like be fully immersed in your game and fully step away from the real world and be that character. So you can't have those jarring things that they don't expect. And it's really easy to find out what those things are because gamers love to tell you the things they hate. Like researching games isn't actually too hard if you want to find out what is wrong. Finding out what is right and what people want is hard. Finding out what they definitely don't want, you can do all day long.
Famously, we love loot boxes, we love monetization, we love paywalls.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We love it when content is just harder to get to.
We love leaving reviews about the things that we love. We rarely complain. Like, why would we do that?
Famously, no game has ever received a negative review ever, and that's the note that we're going to end on here. Nothing but facts here at Into Games. Thank you so much, Stuart, for all of that really wonderful content. Thank you for answering all of these incredible questions. Thanks for just being so incredibly giving and kind and
No
knowledgeable
problem.
on in this space. It's very cool of you. I now grant you a unique privilege here on the Indie Games platform, which is the platform is now not going to be Indie Games. This platform is going to be your platform. This is now your YouTube channel for a moment, where you can say whatever you want. You can shout out whatever you want. Obviously, you've got a lot under your belt in terms of things that you're responsible for and things that you're working on. This is your opportunity to tell our audience about those things. Go for it.
So I'll start with, if you want to connect with me and you missed the QR code, it's really quite easy. You can actually Google Stuart DeVille, and I do so much stuff online that I'm very easily found. So if you want to talk to me about anything, get advice on anything, um, I very much have, it's a term that I hate, but like an open door policy. um, I will talk to anybody and help anybody with their careers and their any questions they might have. If I can help, I will. Outside of that, Game Dev Local, we mostly put on just events. I say just events. We're at, like, networking events. We host the number one global game jam site in the UK. Have done for the last 4 years. Number two globally. If you join us, hopefully you'll help us get to number one globally. That would be amazing. But if you want to find out about all the wonderful things that we do over at Game Dev Local, you can just go to gamedevlocal.com. We have a podcast as well. We release a new episode every week, and we're on episode 200 and something. So there's plenty for you to. Yeah, I know
So many episodes.
it's getting a bit crazy, but yeah, a whole back catalogue. So there's lots and lots of information and knowledge uncovering all aspects of game development. But yeah, thank you for having me. Obviously, it's been wonderful talking to you, Jonas, and always good to see you. And thank you, audience, for all of your questions.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, thanks for everyone who's come along, asked your questions. Thanks for chatting. Thanks for just being really receptive and awesome, and for showing up. I'm sure everything that you've learned here will make a difference. If you find this to be a good resource, you can watch this back on YouTube as well. So hello to you if you're watching in the future. Did Pokemon do well? Did it fizzle out? Who knows?
How did that go?
How did Pokemon go? Honestly, so brave. And yeah, thank you for watching. And obviously share this with anyone who you think would benefit from this talk as well. And the rest of the Intergames channel is filled with these like focused bite-sized talks where we're really just zooming in on something quite specific within a specific discipline, hopefully so that we eventually expand into just this really great compendium of like everything you could ever know in one place. That's it for now. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We're back next week, I believe, with a talk on community management, making content for your games, making content for your communities to engage with. And we've got a couple of other exciting events coming up as well, including an interview with Del Walker, and we've got like a sort of an event with the studio Rare, a UK-based studio who have some internships coming up. And what we get to do there is we get to talk to some of their current interns, some of their hiring team, and some of their recruiters to try and understand what are those internships, how can you put your best self forward when you're applying, and just what to expect if you step into that role, how to succeed if you're going into that internship. All of these events and more available into games, link in the description. You'll find everything that you're looking for, or just poke me a question on the Discord. You can find me, Jonas or JTTG, in the Discord, and I'll help you out. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Look after yourselves. Have a great week. See you at the next one. Bye bye for now.